wanted to ask you, first of all, where do women go to prison in the north? Is there a special unit somewhere, or?
Yeah, well, we don't have a designated women's prison. What they do, they used to be housed in a part of McGabry prison, and then they had to move them from there because basically the prison officers were having sex with some of the prisoners. So they were finding like condoms and all in the work areas. So they moved them from there. And they moved them to a part of Haybank, which is the juvenile male prison. So it has young offenders from the ages of 18 till about, they're meant to go to McGabry when they're 21, but if they behave themselves, they can stay till they're about 23. And they moved them there. And it's more like an open prison regime. I've been in Haybank a few times, up speaking to the women up there, and you have a very weird mixture of people. So I'd say that women, this is where obviously we're going to go and talk about Whitney Hughes. She's quite unusual because usually female offenders fall into two camps. They're either like petty criminals, so shoplifters and signed defaulters and, people with serious addiction problems. Usually they've come out of the care system. They've spent all of their life in the system and it's just them moving on to a different part of the system. Or they've killed their husband. There's two extremes. Do you know what I mean? They go from shoplifting and Primark to murdering their husband. And they murdering their husbands. There's quite a few have been released recently, but they can be quite posh and middle class. And, that's where Hazel Stewart is, the sort of dentist killer. She's there. And they don't get locked up during the day. They do have quite an open regime. See, to be honest with you, the last time I was up in Haybank and they were showing me around, I was nearly ready to ask them to sign me in for 2 weeks. I thought I could lose a bit of weight and stuff while I was there because they're never in the gym. They upcycle furniture and they're growing their own vegetables and there's a wee farm at the side of it and there's all sorts of things. But the loss of liberty is clearly the punishment.
Clearly, Alison.
It is a much more relaxed regime because there's like hairdressers and stuff in it than what they would have if you were in the top security McGabry prison. Like most women's prisons, other places in the UK or Ireland wouldn't be as relaxed as Haybank. I mean, they call the prison officers by their first names. They call it Haybank Wood College. And they try and, because obviously the young offenders are there and the whole idea is that they have to be rehabilitated and try to get them out of the criminal justice system before they end up for the rest of their life. And the women are there as well. It isn't, and obviously all prisons are not nice places to be, but it wouldn't be the worst place you could be, put it like that.
You were sort of seeing it as a 2-week break in a beauty spa and with no phone to disturb you.
I'm convinced that there are celebrities who pay good money to go in to get rehabbed in places that are worse than have worse regimes than Haybank. It's very holistic in terms of the thinking of it is that a lot of these people are very damaged. They've had really hard lives, they have addiction issues, and so they try to treat the addiction. There's a lot of wellness and a lot of yoga and a lot of trying to get people to come to terms. A lot of these women are really badly abused. They've been sexually abused from their children. They've been put in the care system. They've been abused there. Then they've gone on to be like young offenders, and then they've ended up finding themselves in the adult female prison. Apart from, as I say, then you get to the sort of quite posh middle class women who have murdered their husbands. But at the other side of that, there's a million tragic stories that exist in that prison, as they do in all prisons. Although when I say about the move them because we're having sex with the prison guards in McGabry, that hasn't really changed because there's it was last year, but on 2 women, female members of staff within the space of 2 weeks were basically frog marched off the site because they were allegedly having sex with the young offenders in the boys' part of the prison. So that viral video of that prison in England, and everyone was horrified. I don't think that's that rare, to be honest with you. I think that's more common than people think that it is.
I think it is. I mean, look, they're human beings locked up in those circumstances and they still have, I suppose, the general needs of any human being. So it's not really that surprising that that kind of thing goes on.
What happens then is that the prisoners, once they would get to the point where the prison officers would do something with them, something sexual with them, then the prison officer has immediately compromised themselves and then they have something over them where they could get them sacked. And so then they use them to do other things. They use them to bring in phones and drugs and all sorts of other things because they've compromised themselves by allowing themselves to get into some sort of inappropriate relationship. So it can be manipulated as well. A lot of the prisoners.
It's not advised, maybe try and find a love interest on the outside.
I remember speaking to someone who was like a sort of a prisoner during the Troubles, and they said that one of the female officers had been flirting with them and they were told by the sort of IRA leadership that, keep flirting with her because then we can use her to get information off. So
Mm.
it goes back to as long as prisons have existed. But anyway.
Into the mix of that beauty spa you're talking about has landed Whitney Hughes, although she has been in a while. Is that right? She's been in custody a little while.
She was bailed and she was then, but now she's been given 2 years custody. She was jailed just at the start of this month. I'm just going to read this because she was jailed by Judge Paul Ramsey. She's now 31, Whitney Hughes. And as we know, they were told that she was the leader of a significant drug cartel. And he said that it gives the court no pleasure in sending a young lady to prison, but the nature of the offences and the length of time over which they occurred leave me with little or no alternative. So this was a Newry Crown Court sitting in Craigavon. She herself is said to have boasted that she was the primary supplier of drugs in her area, a boast which the judge said he took with a pinch of salt. But it was despite the fact that she was unemployed. She had no visible means of income, but she lived an incredibly affluent lifestyle with, the usual fancy holidays and everything else that we see attached to people who live in those kind of organised crime world circles.
It's so unusual for a woman to describe herself or be anyway described as being a significant member of an organised crime group. It's also unusual for a judge, I suppose, if you turned the tables, Sarah, and it was a guy that was up in front of him, to describe him as the equivalent of a young lady, maybe a young gentleman. You don't hear that too much when they're sentencing.
No, women do get treated better by the criminal justice system. We know this. And usually there's a reason, because on a lot of occasions they're mothers. And therefore, if you were to put a mother in prison, then what do you do with their children? Do they go into the care system? And then what happens to them? And so judges are usually conscious of the fact that they might be causing more problems down the line by removing the primary caregiver. And that's not the case in Whitney's case. She's just, she basically took over her father's drug cartel when he was murdered. So her father, Mark Lovell, they're a strange mix. Her mother is Irish. The father is originally Romanian. And they were part of quite a significant drug feud that had been on for some time. There was an attempt to kill Mark Lovell previously, and then he was eventually shot outside as he went to visit his mother. He was shot dead. So once he died, her brother was no longer on the scene. He took himself off because I think he thought he was going to be targeted next. And she is then said to have stepped in and took over that. And it is unusual because, I can't think, I can think of women who have been killers and who've went on to commit significant crimes and had, fearsome reputations. But that drug cartel world, it's very misogynist, isn't it? It's a very patriarchal world, it's where men rule and the women are the dolly birds, on their arms, with the Gucci handbags and everything else. You don't usually see women in positions of power and influence, which she clearly was within this drug gang.
So it's not just qualities she has, I suppose, personality qualities that she has that put her there. She inherited essentially what was a feared organised crime group. So that would give her a bit of kudos, given that she's the daughter of Lovell and, her family grouping would have been feared.
They would have been. There were quite a significant drug cartel. The father was for quite some time. And they would have had a fearsome reputation. They were involved in quite a sort of bloody and violent feud. She is clearly someone who's been brought up in that world and is quite comfortable existing in that world, and clearly does hold some kind of power and influence, because in a world where a lot of money is changing hands and a lot of drugs are being changing hands, you would imagine that the death of the father, that a lot of people who maybe owed them money or had drugs that were taken from them where they had to pay back money would have seen that as a chance to get out of those debts. But clearly she held enough sway that they would continue to do business with her. And that's what's, I suppose, unusual. Even if you did say, well, I'm taking over, I'm the daughter and I'm taking over this world, you would expect there'd be some kickback from that and people would take advantage of you and see weakness. Whereas she was completely unfazed too by the title. One of our colleagues in the Sunday Life went and knocked her door and she just seemed quite blasé about the whole situation. She didn't seem too fazed by it at all. She's a very young woman. She's a very attractive looking woman as well. She's an unlikely looking, I suppose, leader of a drug gang.
So what did she plead guilty to and what was the background to her ending up before the court?
Yeah, so the judge had said the charges arose during a police search of a storage container on the Mountain Road outside of Newry, and that was when police opened this container. They said there was a small smell of cannabis. They seized large bags of cannabis, bundles of cash, white powder, which transpired to be cocaine, amphetamine and MDMA, financial documents, scales and mobile phones. They're saying the value of the drugs is estimated to be between 31,000 and 42,000. So not great deals of money when you think about what money moves hands in those circles. And they also found just over £13,000 in cash as well. And this is an interesting twist in this, as well as that they found a number of fake Liverpool and Manchester United football shirts. So we're obviously got a number of businesses here ongoing at the same time. We've got the whole array of drugs were being sold, and some dodgy knocked off football shirts as well.
Yeah, obviously very entrepreneurial. And what sort of, lifestyle that was described, that she had this sort of high-end lifestyle, what sort of things was she doing, or was there evidence given around that?
Well, there were, and I mean, like all of these people, they leave traces of the evidence all over their social media, with the fancy holidays and the designer clothes, and she's a very glamorous looking woman. So you could see that there was a lot of money being spent there. So the judge did point to her lifestyle did not in any way equate with, she had no visible means of income really whatsoever. She doesn't have a proper job. But she was, they said, heavily involved in not only the drugs trade, but also moving counterfeit goods from China. And it's actually interesting because a few people have told me that recently that the police are having real trouble when they seize items from drug dealers. So obviously they go in to seize assets, and as part of the assets, they'll take the collection of handbags and shoes belonging to the wife, and the collection of expensive coats that usually exists in, the designer clothes. And when they're getting into the defense are coming in and going, they're all from Turkey, they're all knocked off, I bought those from China. And then the police are trying to find experts that can work out whether these are knockoffs. And sometimes they're saying, well, I can't tell, it might be a good copy or it might not. And then it's impossible to say whether these assets are what they're worth, because the drug dealers are immediately getting their defense to say, I bought those on holiday, they're all fake.
And with these businesses that Whitney Hughes was running and has admitted to running, had she elevated herself out of her childhood home where she had come from? Had that family grouping moved into the classic larger house, etc.?
They had to move around because there was a significant drug feud going on there. So they had moved between a house that was in the south and a house that was in Newry, and they were moving back and forward quite a lot. This was making it obviously difficult to detect them in terms of law enforcement, because they were jumping between two different jurisdictions, but that was also part of their safety as well. So there are a number of houses that they were living in, that her father was living in, her mother was living in, the brother was living in, she was living in, and they were jumping back and forward across the border. And we know that there's nothing the criminals like better than the border anyway. It makes their job a hell of a lot easier when they're able to skip from one jurisdiction to the next. And that's what's been going on for quite some time. I mean, we can't go into too much details, obviously, but Ebony Hughes was in court this morning. That's Whitney's brother, and he's been charged with an assault in Newry, but he had been living in the south. But obviously, Newry, that border town, people are jumping back and forward across it. So you can see that's something that her and her father were actively involved in. The whole family tends to move around and be quite transient. Whether or not that's just part of their criminality, or it's linked to the fact that, they are half Roma, they're half Roma Romanian, and they have a tendency to move around anyway.
And I suppose finally then, what happens in this case? There has been hints about a lifestyle that couldn't have been afforded on social welfare or without any visible means of income. Does it follow that there is a proceeds of crime case? Will they investigate that? Does she have to detail her assets?
There'll have to be a destruction order, which will get rid of all the stuff that was seized from them as well. And then it'll be interesting to see what assets she does have, because that's a completely different section of our law enforcement. Whereas you have CAB in the south, what happens in the north? We used to have the Assets Recovery Agency, and that was done away with. It was useless anyway. And now we have the National Crime Agency deal with that kind of recovery process. And we do have those proceeds of crime orders now, where it's like a reverse burden of proof. So they can take your assets and they don't have to prove that you got them from criminality. You have to prove that you got them legally, which is, in criminal cases, you're innocent until proven guilty. When it comes to those proceeds of wealth orders, you have to show how you obtained those goods legally. And that can be quite difficult for some people, given the fact that there's no paper trail there to show where they got it. They haven't been used to great effect yet. I mean, usually it's like caravans and Ballyhalbert or something they keep removing. Ex-council houses that have been fortified within an inch of their lives. And but those kind of things. But I have note on cases where they went in and they took the handbags and they took all of that. And in one case, I know they tried to take one of those Yelpy designer dogs because the dog apparently is worth a fortune. And there was a whole big case where the solicitor and all had to get on and say you can't take the dog because they were going to say the dog was part of the proceeds of crime. So in one case, we're trying to remove somebody's pet, whatever it was, I don't know, from them.
Whitney Hughes is going to be a young woman when she gets back out still. I mean, she will serve her time in prison and then some of it left on licence. But like, is that grouping, that wider grouping, that organised crime group that she is part of still a force to be reckoned with? Or are they being depleted by the murder of the father? The brother, as you've mentioned, is currently before the courts and she's now locked up.
They're significantly weakened, but that doesn't mean they couldn't regroup when she got out. Because remember, the thing that Hughes and her father had going for them at that point in time is they already had those European links. A lot of those Irish crime gangs, they have to then go and forge those links with other criminal gangs, mainly in Eastern Europe. And we know that's where a lot of the drugs and that's where the routes come through. There've been old smuggling routes that were used years ago for other things, and they just use them now for drugs and guns and at times people. They already had those links established because the father had quite significant links in Romania and Bulgaria and all through that part of Europe. So she could regroup quite easily. She only hasn't got very much time to do. As you said, she'll be a very young woman. It'll be up to her whether she now wants to make an honest living or whether she wants to go back to her life of crime. But we'll not be long finding out, because you would imagine there would be a lot of eyes on her.
Well, certainly, given how unusual she is being a female in that world, that she has gained some celebrity, hasn't she?
She has, yeah, she has. Okay, and I mean, it's probably the first time I've ever heard any female stand up in court anywhere. Now, I don't know, just in Northern Ireland, probably anywhere in this island, to stand up in court and be said that this woman is the leader of a significant drug cartel. I mean, it's just never happened before. So, yes, and I think she quite likes the fame. I think she quite likes, because it gives her a bit of a reputation, especially getting into Haybank, where there are other prisoners there who have maybe been in the criminal justice system for years and are quite hardened in terms of their attitude towards other prisoners. I mean, she'll probably go in with a bit of swagger about her, thinking, because that's been said about her and it's been so widely publicised. And we do know that whatever prisoners do in between getting their nails done on upcycled furniture is that they all read the Sunday World, and we know that Sunday World is the most popular read paper in the prisons, and we already know that.
Oh, God. Right. Well, they have some taste, maybe. Should I say that?
It's like writing about themselves. This is the thing.
Yes.
They pretend they don't like you writing about them, but really we know they do.
It's like their Hello magazine, isn't it?
Yeah. What a magazine for criminals.
Well, Allison Morris, enjoy your holidays and thank you very much.
Off out of here to find some sunshine away from this place.
Look at you. Right, we'll talk to you when you get back. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.